What if the reason you are overlooked, ignored, or quietly used is not because you are weak, but because you are good? What if the world does not punish cruelty as much as it punishes unprotected goodness? This is not cynicism. This is realism. And today, we examine it through the sharp and uncomfortable lens of Machiavelli. This is purely noetical, where we strip away comforting illusions and study power, strategy, and human behavior as they truly operate. Not to become immoral, but to become aware. Today, you will understand three things clearly. First, what Machiavelli truly meant when he warned against being purely good. Second, why goodness without strength becomes a liability in competitive environments. Third, how to remain ethical without becoming exploitable. This discussion does not promote cruelty, dishonesty, or harm. It promotes awareness. Understanding how power works does not corrupt you. It protects you. In The Prince, by the Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli makes a statement that has disturbed readers for centuries. He writes that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must come to ruin among so many who are not good. This is not an emotional claim. It is an observation. Machiavelli lived during political instability in Florence. He saw alliances collapse, rulers betrayed, republics fall, and mercenary armies switch sides for money. His conclusions came from watching real power struggles, not from imagination. His argument is simple. Human beings are not consistently virtuous. They are capable of loyalty, yes, but they are also driven by fear, ambition, greed, insecurity, and survival. If you enter such a world with rigid moral innocence, you become predictable. And predictability in a competitive environment becomes weakness. The world does not reward goodness. It rewards power, stability, and leverage. Goodness is respected only when it is backed by strength. Without strength, goodness is ignored, or worse, exploited. Machiavelli believed that human loyalty is rarely permanent. It is often conditional. People remain faithful when it serves their safety, their advantage, or their reputation. But when circumstances change, loyalty weakens. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli explains that men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous. This is not emotional language. It is diagnostic language. He is describing patterns he observed in political life. He lived in a time of unstable alliances, shifting military loyalty, and constant betrayal among Italian city-states. Rulers were supported as long as they were strong. Once they appeared weak, supporters defected. Machiavelli did not conclude that humans are monsters. He concluded that humans are responsive to advantage. He observed that promises are kept while fear of consequence remains. Once that fear disappears, promises dissolve. Agreements that are not reinforced by structure tend to collapse under pressure. This is why he advises rulers not to rely solely on goodwill or verbal commitments. He argues that trust without enforcement is fragile. Modern research supports this observation. In organizational psychology, studies consistently show that when oversight is reduced, rule-breaking increases. In large-scale corporate fraud investigations across different regions of the world, unethical behavior rises significantly when internal controls are weak or penalties are unlikely. When monitoring systems are strengthened, misconduct declines. This pattern demonstrates something simple. Behavior adjusts to incentive structures. This does not mean everyone is evil. It means behavior is shaped by consequences. Machiavelli understood this long before modern economic theory explained incentive systems. He recognized that people calculate risk, even if they do not consciously admit it. When there is no cost for betrayal, betrayal becomes easier. When there is no cost for disrespect, disrespect becomes common. This insight leads to one of his most misunderstood teachings. He argues that love is fragile because it is emotional. It depends on gratitude, affection, and voluntary attachment. These are unstable forces. They fluctuate with mood, advantage, and circumstance. Fear, however, depends on consequences. And consequences create consistency. When someone knows there is a real cost for disobedience or betrayal, behavior stabilizes. This is why Machiavelli famously states that it is safer to be feared than loved if one must choose. He does not advocate cruelty. He does not promote violence for its own sake. He is explaining reliability. Love can disappear when interests shift. Fear, when tied to measured and predictable consequences, produces order. He also warns that a ruler must avoid hatred. Fear without hatred is stability. Hatred invites rebellion. So his position is balanced, not extreme. Authority must be firm enough to command respect, but controlled enough to prevent resentment. What he ultimately means is this: authority must carry weight. If people believe there are no consequences for crossing you, your goodness loses influence. Your kindness becomes optional in their calculations. And when self-interest collides with your values, self-interest usually wins. This is not a condemnation of humanity. It is an acknowledgement of human nature under pressure. Machiavelli's realism is uncomfortable because it removes illusions, but it also provides clarity, and clarity is the first step towards strategic strength. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli warns rulers about excessive generosity and uncontrolled mercy. He argues that while generosity appears noble, it becomes dangerous when it is not supported by sustainable resources. His reasoning is direct and practical. If a ruler spends freely to gain popularity, he must finance that spending. If revenue does not match generosity, he will eventually need to tax heavily or seize resources to compensate. When that happens, the same people who praised his generosity will resent him for the burden. Popularity gained through excess giving transforms into anger once the bill arrives. History confirms this pattern repeatedly. Economic records from multiple governments show that persistent overspending without productive growth increases public debt instability. When debt grows faster than national income for prolonged periods, the risk of inflation, currency decline, or financial crisis rises. In several historical cases across different continents, unsustainable fiscal policies led to economic contraction and public unrest. When governments distribute benefits without structural productivity, long-term stability weakens. Machiavelli observed this cycle before modern economic statistics existed. He saw rulers weaken their states by trying to appear generous. He concluded that it is better to be cautious with resources and endure temporary criticism than to be generous in a way that forces future extraction. He even argues that a reputation for frugality can be safer than a reputation for generosity, because controlled spending preserves independence. Once you depend on external borrowing or heavy taxation to maintain your image, you lose freedom of action. This principle extends beyond politics. In personal life, excessive giving produces a similar pattern. When someone constantly gives time, energy, money, or emotional labor without boundaries, people adjust their expectations upward. What once felt like kindness becomes normal. What once felt like sacrifice becomes assumed. Psychological studies on reciprocity show that gratitude decreases when generosity becomes predictable. When help is consistent and guaranteed, appreciation declines. The human mind adapts quickly to benefits. Then something subtle happens. If the giver slows down, even slightly, disappointment appears. The same generosity that once inspired gratitude now creates obligation. And once expectation replaces appreciation, resentment becomes possible. Machiavelli's insight is not anti-kindness, it is anti-naivety. Unconditional goodness teaches others that your sacrifice has no limit. And when there is no visible limit, people test the boundary. Excess mercy without structure weakens authority. Excess generosity without sustainability creates backlash. The danger is not mercy itself. The danger is mercy without calculation. Machiavelli makes one of his most strategic distinctions in The Prince. He argues that it is not necessary for a ruler to be virtuous at all times, but it is necessary for him to appear virtuous. This idea unsettles many readers because it challenges the belief that internal morality alone guarantees stability. Machiavelli's reasoning is observational. Most people do not examine character deeply. They respond to visible signals. They judge based on what they see, hear, and feel in the moment. Modern research in social psychology supports this. Studies show that first impressions form within seconds and strongly influence long-term perception. Research on leadership perception indicates that individuals who appear confident and composed are more likely to be trusted, even before their competence is tested. In workplace environments, perceived authority often shapes influence more quickly than demonstrated expertise. Perception shapes power. Machiavelli understood that authority rests partly on image. If a leader appears unstable, immoral, or inconsistent, public confidence declines. When confidence declines, obedience weakens. When obedience weakens, instability increases. This is why he advises rulers to appear compassionate, faithful, humane, religious, and upright. These visible qualities stabilize public opinion. Public opinion stabilizes rule. But he also warns that circumstances may require actions that contradict these appearances. War, betrayal, and survival may demand firmness, deception, or severity. If a ruler binds himself so tightly to a moral image that he cannot adapt when conditions change, he becomes vulnerable. In Machiavelli's framework, this is not hypocrisy. It is strategic adaptation. He separates internal flexibility from external presentation. Internally, a leader must be ready to act according to necessity. Externally, he must preserve a reputation that maintains order and loyalty. This principle operates beyond politics. In professional life, individuals who manage perception carefully often advance more effectively than those who rely solely on internal virtue. Competence matters, but visible confidence influences opportunity. Reputation becomes a form of capital. Machiavelli's realism is simple. People respond to what they perceive, and perception can be shaped. The danger of rigid moral transparency is that it removes flexibility. If you feel compelled to display every internal thought and maintain visible purity at all times, you lose strategic range. Machiavelli does not ask you to abandon virtue. He asks you to understand human judgment. In competitive environments, reality matters, but reputation often matters first. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli gives one of his most practical images. He says a ruler must learn how to be both a lion and a fox. The lion represents strength. The fox represents intelligence. The lion frightens wolves. It uses force. It represents visible power, the ability to punish, defend, and command. Without the lion, a ruler appears weak, and weakness invites challenge. The fox detects traps. It sees deception before it closes in. It understands strategy, timing, and hidden motives. Without the fox, a ruler becomes predictable and easily manipulated. Machiavelli argues that strength alone is not enough. A ruler who relies only on force may intimidate enemies, but he will miss hidden alliances and subtle betrayals. He may react too late to conspiracies forming beneath the surface. Intelligence alone is not enough either. A ruler who depends only on cleverness but lacks force may understand danger clearly, yet have no power to stop it. Strategy without enforcement becomes theory. Survival requires dual capacity. A purely good person often tries to be neither lion nor fox. They aim to be morally consistent in every situation. They assume honesty will be met with honesty. They assume fairness will be returned with fairness. Machiavelli warns that this assumption is dangerous. When you lack strength, you invite attack. In political history, leaders who failed to maintain strong defenses were overthrown quickly, regardless of their moral intentions. When military readiness declines, rivals advance. History repeatedly shows that power vacuums do not remain empty for long. When you lack cunning, you fall into traps. Leaders who ignore rival ambition or underestimate competitors often lose not because they are cruel, but because they are naive. Alliances shift quietly. Interests change quietly. And those who do not anticipate this are caught off guard. Many historical figures lost authority not because they were evil, but because they misjudged the motives of others. They believed agreements were stable when incentives had already changed. Machiavelli's teaching is simple. If you cannot defend yourself, your morality will not protect you. If you cannot detect deception, your honesty will not save you. The lion protects you from open aggression. The fox protects you from hidden danger. To survive in environments shaped by ambition and competition, both are required. Modern economic research reinforces a structural truth that aligns closely with Machiavellian realism. In Capital in the 21st Century, Thomas Piketty analyzes data across several centuries and multiple countries. His findings show that wealth and capital tend to concentrate over time when returns on capital exceed overall economic growth. In simple terms, those who already possess assets often see those assets grow faster than the economy itself. Without intervention or regulation, inequality increases. What does this mean in Machiavellian terms? Power compounds. Resources create influence. Influence creates opportunity. Opportunity creates more resources. This cycle strengthens those who understand structure. Good intentions alone do not enter this cycle automatically. If you operate purely from moral goodwill without building leverage, assets, or structure, you remain outside the compounding system. Meanwhile, others who accumulate influence strategically increase their advantage year after year. Economic data across multiple regions show that concentrated ownership of assets often leads to concentrated decision-making power. Those with capital influence policy, markets, and institutions. Over time, structural power becomes self-reinforcing. Machiavelli understood this principle in political form. He saw that rulers who controlled military force, alliances, and wealth could stabilize their position. Those who relied only on reputation or goodwill eventually lost ground. Goodness does not compound automatically. Power does. This does not mean goodness is useless. It means goodness must be supported by structure. Without structure, it remains vulnerable to those who operate strategically. In personal terms, the same logic applies. Skills compound. Networks compound. Financial discipline compounds. Influence compounds. But sacrifice without accumulation leaves you dependent on the goodwill of others. And goodwill is unstable. Machiavelli would argue that survival requires building structural advantage, not just moral approval. Modern psychology confirms something Machiavelli understood through observation. People project their own standards onto others. Research on cognitive bias shows that individuals often assume others share similar ethical boundaries. This is sometimes called projection bias. When you value honesty, you expect honesty. When you avoid manipulation, you assume others avoid it too. This creates vulnerability. Studies in behavioral science show that individuals frequently overestimate how ethical others will be in competitive situations. In negotiation experiments, participants often assume fairness norms will guide decisions, even when incentives strongly reward self-interest. When expectations do not match reality, miscalculation occurs. Machiavelli refuses to project. He does not assume others will behave according to moral ideals. He assumes they will respond to advantage, fear, and opportunity. If you assume everyone thinks like you miscalculate risk. This is especially dangerous when dealing with highly competitive personalities. Individuals driven strongly by ambition or dominance may interpret kindness as weakness. If they sense no consequence for pushing boundaries, they push further. Machiavelli studies humans as they are, not as they should be. He removes illusion before building strategy. This does not require cynicism. It requires clarity. When you understand that not everyone shares your moral limits, you become cautious. You verify before trusting. You prepare before committing. You build safeguards rather than relying on assumptions. Psychological blind spots are dangerous because they feel comfortable. Believing others are like you reduces tension, but comfort reduces vigilance. Machiavelli chooses vigilance over comfort, and in environments shaped by competition, vigilance preserves stability. The danger of being purely good is not that goodness is wrong. It is that goodness combined with projection blinds you to reality. Machiavelli's realism forces you to remove that blindfold. Pause and reflect for a moment. Have there been times when your kindness was mistaken for weakness? Have there been moments when your silence was interpreted as inability? This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming aware. Machiavelli does not argue that goodness is worthless. He argues that goodness without strength collapses. He argues that mercy without boundaries invites exploitation. He argues that love without authority dissolves. He argues that survival sometimes requires acting against conventional morality, not because evil is admirable, but because stability requires realism. The danger of being a good person is not goodness itself. The danger is being good in a world where others calculate advantage, while you refuse to calculate at all. Machiavelli teaches this clearly. Be capable of kindness, but also capable of firmness. Be ethical, but never powerless. Goodness backed by strength commands respect. Goodness without strength invites control. If this perspective challenged your thinking, then this is exactly why purely noethical exists. Comment below. Is it possible to remain good and still survive in a world driven by power? Subscribe, because this channel is not just content. It is a compounding archive of strategic awareness. And in a world that rewards leverage, awareness is your first form of power.